You're now listening to Sound Talent Media. Check out more shows at soundtalentmedia.com.
When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like Aloe or Allbirds, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and great marketing. But an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business, making selling, and for shoppers, buying, simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does online business better than Shopify. It's home of Shop Pay, the #1 checkout in the world. You can use it to boost conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going through to checkout. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/income, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/income to upgrade your selling today. That's shopify.com/income.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon Prime. There's nothing sweeter than baking cookies during the holidays. With Prime, I get all my ingredients delivered right to my door, fast and free, no last-minute store trips needed. And of course, I blast my favorite holiday playlist on Amazon Music. It's the ultimate soundtrack for creating unforgettable memories. From streaming to shopping, it's on Prime. Visit Amazon.com/Prime to get more out of whatever you're into.
Hello, folks. Welcome back to another episode of the podcast. I have had a rough week. I'm not going to lie. It has been rough over here at the Weiland house. We are all sick. I am sick right now. I haven't been this sick for this long I can't remember. Actually, I know exactly when it was. It was 2019 when we first got full strength Ronavirus here in the house. That was the last time we've been this ill. Fortunately, we're not nearly as bad as we were then, but it's been a rough week to say the least. But on the bright side, I still got content for you. I can't stop this content train. It's got to keep rolling. And this week's episode is really, really good. I spoke with the folks from Warm Audio. I spoke with Bryce and Des. Bryce is the founder of the company, and Des works in marketing, and I got the story. I'm sure you've seen the products. I'm positive you have. If you haven't, and you're listening to this podcast, I'm kind of astounded that you have not heard of Warm Audio before clicking on this, but you can now prepare to experience the quote-unquote red Corolla effect because you are going to see Warm Audio everywhere now that you are actually looking for it. We've got some fun promo stuff coming up with Stringjoy and Warm Audio, so stay tuned for that. But I wanted to get them on so I could get the story of the company. I have seen their products on shelves for years. I've used a bunch of them, and I wanted to know what was going on with this company. So in a very Jerry Seinfeld-like way, what's the deal with Warm Audio? Let's get into it. Let's find out. Here we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Tone Mob Podcast, a show about guitar stuff, occasionally, sometimes. I'm your host, Blake Weiland, and with me today, I have Des and Bryce from Warm Audio. What is up, fellas?
How's it going?
Hey, what's going on?
Man, I'm excited to have you guys here today because, honestly, I don't think enough people know enough about you guys, yet the gear industry at large sees you everywhere. So I think the story needs told, but maybe the place to start with would be your individual stories. You know, Bryce, obviously you were the founder. Des, I don't know your story as well, so let's let you guys take that in whatever order you see fit. When did you start playing? What got you interested in music, and kind of how'd you get here?
Bryce, I think you should start.
Yeah.
I think you got to lay the foundation for everybody.
I was going to let you start. Okay, cool. So I played guitar in high school. I was in a band. We recorded in a couple studios, and they were local in Madison, Wisconsin, where I grew up. And the first studio recording wasn't very good. Second studio recording wasn't very good. And so I was a bit disappointed. I'd never really heard a bad recording before because everything I listened to was a professional record, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, man, like there's such things as bad recordings. I thought I was going to come out and sound like a Nirvana record. I just didn't get it. And so I started learning about how recording worked. I started buying equipment. I started mixing myself. So this was in the late 90s, right as computer recording became accessible and you could get USB interfaces. Eventually got really intrigued with preamps because I was working out of a studio that had an Avalon 737 preamp. And I plugged my like cheap $199 condenser mics into this preamp. And I was like, whoa, like they sound very different. And so I was like, oh, this is why people talk about preamps. Because, you hear people always are like, what mic should I get? Oh, I had this mic and it didn't cut it. So I went to this expensive mic. And then I keep upgrading my mic. And it's like, well, what preamp are you using? Like, let's stop there and go back to preamps. So it kind of got me obsessed with preamps. I started learning how they were built, taking them apart, buying kits online, pulling parts out of old mixing consoles and building pre's. And then from there decided to go big and manufacture. At the time when Warm Audio came out with our first preamp, you couldn't get a fully professional pre. And what I mean by that is like a transformer input, transformer output, good name brand quality American-made transformers, fully discrete signal path. You could not get that under $1,000 back then in 2012.
I remember very much. Yep.
So when we came out with the WA12, it was a half rack tabletop pre. It was bright orange. The marketing message was a fully professional preamp at a ridiculous price, and it was $449 when it came out. And it just slowly built. Like people tried it and was like, this is legit. I didn't have to spend $2,000 or whatever. And then from there, obviously started coming out with more and more things. So when Warm Audio came to the market, we were innovative. As much as it's recreating vintage circuits, nobody was doing it with the quality that we were doing it. And so it kind of got people looking around like, wait, you can put like Cinemag transformers in this thing and like build them for this price, and whoa. And it took a while. Now the market's kind of caught on. There are a lot of other brands trying to do what we do. I still think we're the best, of course. Yeah. So when we first got into it, it was quite innovative and different, I think, in 2012. So there it is.
Yeah, for sure. Des, how did you get involved in all this?
Yeah, so my journey to Warm is kind of similar, I think, to what you'd mentioned before we started recording, right? So I started playing guitar when I was pretty young, 10 years old, but I was a musician from the time I was 4. Obsessed with me, just that obsession where like it's always going to be part of my life kind of thing. And then the first time I recorded, kind of similar to Bryce, I recorded my band. We scrounged up money together. I'm from New York originally, Western New York, Rochester, out near Buffalo. And we recorded in junior high, which is funny where I'm at in Mass. No one calls it junior high out here. We're like 12 or 13 years old. And much like Bryce, we get a bad recording. And mostly because we're bad musicians at the time. I wouldn't say the engineer or the studio was that bad. But we're like, oh, this is not great. And then we got a little bit better, and it still wasn't awesome. And we were like, what is the delta between what we're hearing on the radio and what we're getting, right? I become obsessed with recording. I walk into studios, and I don't know how to describe it. I still feel like this when I go to Austin at Warm Studios. When I walk in that place, I feel like at home. Like it's just such a really nice environment. Like my whole demeanor changes almost. And then I get an internship the second I legally can. Like my parents signed my rights away at 14 to like go to this place over the summer. And then all of a sudden throughout the school year, and I start learning how to record pretty young. My band, plays kind of like semi-local, like New York, Ohio, down to Florida. We're kind of in the Warped Tour era, but not on the tour itself, with a lot of bands like that. So this is like 04 to 07. And then I encounter a Warm...
The glory
years. Yeah, oh yeah. Tons of emo. We played with so many bands that we didn't sound like. We got booed a lot because we were playing very like... For those who are looking for a example, think more like Copeland or May, but we're playing with bands that sound like The Used or like me, even as hardcore as Norma Jean, and they're booing us, which justified. You didn't pay to see that. So So and then I find a Warm Audio mic when I'm recording in Boston, and I slowly start buying more gear, and it just gives me this feeling of I could not believe what it was worth, like what it cost me to purchase. And when an opportunity came, I had to join because I knew it was the real deal. So
nice.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I have a slightly different take on this from you guys because I was recording so young, just my voice into like little recorders and stuff. I knew the bad recordings existed. I didn't know how in the world people got good recordings. My first attempt at actually recording a record was using Microsoft Sound Recorder in like Windows 95 or something. Yep. And we had the little skinny mic that comes free with your grandma's computer. That's what we were using, my grandma's computer. And we had a snare drum and a hi-hat, acoustic bass, and acoustic guitars. And we moved the mic around. That's how we mixed, because it was just one mic in the room.
Wow.
And considering that, I went back and listened to some of it. We're awful, but it doesn't sound as bad as it should. I think maybe we're paying enough attention. Like, oh no, you got to move it over here. Oh no, you scoot more in that corner. It seems to be bassier over there. Like things like that. But
you can do it that way. Yeah.
But when I first got into going to studios and seeing what real studios, quote unquote, looked like, I saw a lot of warm stuff, because I didn't start doing that until probably 2012 to 2014 is when that really started happening for me. So I've been kind of interested ever since, because it was like, well, look, this stuff's really good. Does it all have to be $4 billion? Like what's going on here? So that all makes a ton of sense. But you eventually got into pedals. I know that was a lot later. Was that just because you're a guitarist and you love effects and you're like, hey, I can't get this stuff? What drove you to the pedal market?
Yeah, I'd say, both Des and I here really love pedals, and we're guitarists. And so it made a lot of sense, especially because we kept getting asked, honestly. We would meet with, whether it be dealers or end users, and they'd just say, hey, have you thought about making pedals? I've always wanted this one. And then I started looking and realizing a lot of these vintage pedals are $600, $1,000, $2,000, and was like, oh, we could do the same kind of thing we're doing with Warm. What's really important to us is to not just release a gimmick, right? We don't want it to look like the original but sound nothing like it. We really want to get darn close. And so there are some that we've turned down just because we didn't think we could do it right at an affordable price. But there are several that we've nailed. The funny one is the Klon that we do, which we call the Centavo. When we released that was the one all the dealers and distributors said, don't do that one, because everybody's already recreated clones, and it's by far been our best selling one.
Yeah.
So, it's so weird, because when I think that the market can't possibly stomach another clone. Just being honest, everybody says that. Yeah. They do really well. I'm good friends with Brian Wampler, and I do the podcast with him. Yep. And I remember when he was getting ready to do the Tumnus Germanium, I'm like, that's gonna explode, right? And he's like, the Tumnus has been out forever. It's not gonna be that big of a deal. And it exploded. So it was the hottest thing in the gear world to talk about at that point. And he just was like, well, I just made it a little bit different. He didn't even quite understand.
Yeah. It's pedals weird. Are funny. When you think about how different two overdrives actually are, right? There are obviously really drastic differences from some in terms of how the mids come out, right? The amount of distortion gain on tap. I have and I'm not exaggerating, I have 10 overdrives that are probably within 15% of each other. But with different amp, right? Maybe a 6v6 amp, one sounds a little different. One, thickens the amp up a little bit, which I like. And then, maybe I have another style. You talked about Klons and Centavos, right? Think about tube screamers. If there's a million Klons, there's a billion tube screamers, right? And I probably have 7, and they kind of just are different enough to where I don't want to sell any of them, and that's cool. So
yeah. No, I that's the weird thing about distortion and dirt. You can take something and make the tiniest tweak, and it feels drastically different too. And I learned that even I'm gotten way too nerdy with all of this stuff, but I was making pickups for a little while before I realized I don't have time to do that. And I was learning from somebody who had been making pickups for a long time. His name was Ken, and he is Ken. He's still with us. How did I say it? He passed. He's still here. He's not doing pickups anymore, but and he was showing me how just different magnet placements completely changed the pickup. I was like, oh, I love these two pickups you make. They sound so similar, but they're so different. He's like, oh, the magnet placement's different. That's all it is.
Wow.
What? The coils are the same. The construction is mostly the same. The magnets are just in different places, and they sound completely different. It's weird how audio gear can be that way. Do you find that is also the same in the pro audio and recording areas, or is it a little bit different?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially like components like signal transformers where the audio is running through it. Because I understand there are probably a lot of people listening to this that have really good amplifiers and they can hear any slight change with their pedals through that amp. In the studio world, though, right? If you're in a really quiet, perfect room with great speakers, you can hear the tiniest differences of quality, of tone, or at least you should be able to if you're in a good studio setup. And so there are a lot of brands that recreate vintage pre's and compressors and things like us, and they don't use boutique branded transformers, signal transformers. And that's a place that we just won't budge on because we know how much it makes a difference. The tiniest bit, it's crazy, even from brand to brand, right? Like Cinemag has a different sound than Lundahl or Carnhill. They all kind of have their own recipes. And it's fascinating, right? Like we can obsess over the tiniest little tone differences sometimes. And it's tough in audio too, because you're like, ooh, I like that about this set of components. It's crystal clear. And then somebody else might say, ooh, I like this because it's a little bit muddier and warmer. And it's like, well, what do we decide on, right? Because we want to make everybody happy. And so you sometimes have to just make decisions, or the ideal scenario is you give people tonal options on the actual product where they can
put a switch on
it. Right.
A little bit. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, it's funny when you would mention the coil thing on your pickup story, it made me think of the R&D we went through on our 44 ribbon, right? Because like ribbon placement inside a microphone, I mean, you change the angle 2 millimeters, right? It doesn't sound the same, right? Like you don't reinforce it the right way, it doesn't sound the same. And that, like, getting those products to market in a place where we get the kind of reviews we get and the praise from artists and their engineers and producers, it's a huge labor of love. There's a lot of R&D and like just getting it in our studio and testing it and breaking it and testing it and breaking it to make sure it's going to deliver what we expect, right, out of something that good. But yeah, to your point, right, like you move a ribbon a millimeter in the wrong direction and you have a different product, and unacceptable, right, in terms of what people expect when they buy it.
And that's what is, I mean, similar across the board with product development, right? You're talking about moving a ribbon around. So if somebody just takes apart any product, we've seen this recently in the pedal world, we won't go over that again. But people probably know what I'm talking about. But you can't just break things down to like, well, this is this handful of components and therefore it's only worth XYZ.
Yeah.
The amount of time you spend trying to figure out where to put the ribbon, how to reinforce it, like all of that has to be accounted for at the end of the day. And I think that is something that is just lost kind of on consumers. And I try to remember that when I'm looking at anything, not just music gear. Sometimes I'm like, what? I paid $10 for this piece of metal. And it's like, well, that piece of metal performs exactly the task you need it to in exactly the right way. And someone had to spend a bunch of time to figure that out. So it's a lot of the R&D time is what you're paying for, even on products that you're trying to recreate something that already exists. Well, how do you do it as good as you can? Yeah. You spend a million years on
you have the R&D time, and then you have the efficiency of assembly and labor, which, like, when I first started hand building preamps, I was making 2-channel rack mount preamps. And I was like, oh, it only costs this much for the components, even using name brand. Oh, I'm going to make tons of money. And then I'm like, dude, it literally took me like 25 hours to solder this preamp together because I was doing like, hand wired connections, cutting, crimping, like, it wasn't a very efficient process. And so, yeah, I think sometimes people look at the components and go, oh, I could buy all these components for X. That's less than what I paid for it. It's like, yeah, but by the time you buy them, solder and build it, what if you build it wrong? You got to start over, buy it again. Like,
what if you don't have the knowledge to know that you built it wrong either, right? Like what components failing and why? I mean, we don't have to dive in all the way into what you referenced earlier, but it's kind of like, I challenge people, go put a parts caster together, right? Like buy products that are supposed to fit, right? Like buy like 18 millimeter board, Fender tuners and put it in a Fender neck and put it on a Fender body and buy Fender pickups, do all that, do all the soldering yourself, screw all the screws in yourself, and tell me if you end up with an instrument or stuff that's put together. Because I've played a bunch of parts casters off, secondhand and friends, and it's like, dude, this thing is not an instrument. This is stuff that's connected, you know, like it takes some work to make an instrument. Like you may have to shim the neck pocket. People don't even get pickup height, right? Like I've picked up guitars where I'm like, dude, your pickups are way too low. Like this is, you don't even know what this pickup sounds like. You know what I mean? Like the magnet's not even pulling the string down. So it's like, there's a lot to like having parts and putting them together and making a product people will make music with. There's a big gap between those two things.
Yes, absolutely. And you ideally want, because some people are really into DIY, and that's cool. I mean, that's how you got started, right? You figured out how to make these preamps. But ideally, what most musicians want, they want to plug in, they want to grab their instrument, and they want to be able to make the thing that they want to make without having to think about what they're doing with it. You know, I mean, they have to think about their playing, but they don't want to be like, oh, my pickup height is off. Like that's going down to an extra nerdy level for most people. Most people just want to be able to play and get a great sound. And, you know, that's probably not most people listening to this podcast, to be fair. We like to get extra nerdy, but that's the thing. You're trying to design the products to perform just like that, right? You're just trying to inspire people to get in and play.
Yeah. As a gear nerd myself, one of the harsh realities of being a guitar player in this world and loving the gear is knowing that the most successful guitar players in the world, whether you're thinking on tour and studio, have techs, right? Like they have gear nerds for them. You know what I mean? They're not the gear nerd, right? They want to get up on stage and they want the guitar to be in tune and sound cool. And they want to hit it. Maybe they don't even a lot of people don't even hit their own buttons. That's just someone is doing the scenes in the background, hitting the buttons for them. They know the song in and out and they know, oh, we're going to the bridge. This is what the guy wants. This is what happens. Even the people who still have pedal boards out on stage, so much is being done in the background for them to get that sound out into the mains. And that's the reality too. And I've seen it working in studios. Some really killer musicians. Like again, as a gear nerd, I wish that all of the guitar players out in the world were as nerdy about guitar as I am and every part that goes into it. A lot of people just want the thing to sound good and play and feel comfortable. And you see that working in studios. People just want to show up, plug in, and go.
Yeah, through doing this, I've gotten lucky enough, and I'm sure you guys have some stories too, to have some musicians I really love and respect come over here and hang out and nerd out, or I bring a bunch of stuff to them and we nerd out about stuff. And I'm often kind of taken aback about, I'm like, wow, I'm way down the rabbit hole compared to some of these very successful people. Like you didn't know about this little tiny boutique company over here? I can't believe you. Of course you don't know that. You're too busy being successful. But have you guys gotten to have some cool experiences with your musical heroes or people you admire? I imagine that's happened a few times at this point.
Hi, I'm Vincent, and I'm here to talk about the Mercury X. My dad's always going on and on about how cool Maris is. He really went off on one about the Mercury X the other day. He said something about a 4,800 hertz sample rate and 99 preset locations and 33 banks, and something along the lines of the most advanced reverb pedal ever devised by man? That's all true, but I only care about one thing. This pedal sounds sick. So make sure you check out the Mercury X and all the other fine products at maris.us, as well as fine retailers worldwide. All right, Dad, now can I have my Pocky?
How exactly do artists get their music on Spotify, Apple Music, Deezer, Tidal, all these services? How in the world do you get your music there? Well, in the past, you had to use something called a record label. But these days, you can use DistroKid. DistroKid is the absolute easiest way to get your music up on streaming services. And it's the most affordable way to do so. Not only do plans start at $22.99 for the entire year, that's less than $2 a month, DistroKid also does not take a cut of your streaming revenue, unlike some other services out there. Even better if you sign up by going to tonemob.com/distrokid. That's tonemob.com/distrokid. One more time, that's tonemob.com/distrokid. You'll get 30% off. That's right, 30% off their already extremely reasonable prices. So go to tonemob.com/distrokid and get your music out there. We are brought to you today by Sweetwater, specifically the Gear Exchange. You may have heard about this. This is a place where you can go to buy and sell your used gear. Maybe you got a pedal over there that's just kind of collecting dust. Maybe there's something you've been eyeing from the Sweetwater catalog. Well, right now is a great time to turn that unused gear into something you're actually going to use. Even better, if you sell on the Gear Exchange, you can keep 100% of the sale as long as you choose a Sweetwater gift card as your payout method. That is not too shabby because, let's be honest, most of this buying and selling we do is just to fund new gear purchases, and that is a great way to reach a wide variety of customers and keep 100% in your pocket, or rather on your pedal board. So go check out the Sweetwater Gear Exchange and turn that unused gear into something that's actually going to help you write that next huge riff.
Yeah, we've been really blessed to have a lot of, really this brand wasn't started for the rich and famous, but it is very cool to see some of the rich and famous use the products, because if it's good enough for them and they can afford anything, it says something. I mean, guitar wise, I know that, I had actually kind of funny. I had the opportunity to meet Billy Corgan. I was a huge fan of Smashing Pumpkins in my high school years. And, at the time, we did not have this pedal out. It was actually our warm drive pedal. And, and I was like, hey, if you ever need any products, hit me up. You're my idol, man. I'll send you some stuff. He ended up not contacting me, but then bought the warm drive pedal on his own. And now it's on his board, and it was in a magazine review, or he was talking about his pedal board. He was saying it's like one of his favorite pedals. And so that's cool. And we had Dolly Parton use one of our microphones on her vocal on her rock album. Yeah, on every song on her vocal. And it wasn't because Dolly Parton was like, ooh, I want that mic. Her engineer happened to own it. He thought it sounded good. He put it up. They both really liked how it had what he said, a chesty, deep sound to it. And they used it on the album. We found out, there's quite a lot. We've got, I found out Mick Jagger used our mic on one of his songs. But there's a long list. You can go to our website and check it out. But it's very validating, that when we started the brand, people were like, it's just too cheap. It's like, here you go. Here's a U87 style microphone with a Cinemag transformer, an Australian design capsule. It sells for $699, right? The real thing costs $3,600. So it's far cheaper. But then you start seeing, actually, this exact mic showed up in a Drake music video, right? Drake was singing on it. So it's like, Drake can afford anything, But they're these engineers and musicians that can't afford everything, buy it, and then they put it up on these famous people, and that sounds good, and everybody's happy, and it's pretty cool. Yeah. It's real validating.
Yeah, and I'm going to cherry pick. Our compressors are out now, but we got to have Chad Smith and Corey Henry come in to Austin, and James Cook record like this cool trio jam thing. And it was just crazy because I was like, I'll admit that after we were hanging out, we were listening to like the Chili Peppers on vinyl after, because I was like, I can't believe what I just saw. Like, I can't believe I was just in the room, man.
Of course you were.
I was like my like full on like 14-year-old going to like the record store to buy a CD self like came back. And it was just the craziest thing to like see it in person and be like, they always say he hits really hard. And then you're in the studio listening on the ATCs and he hits hard. And you're like, that's dope. Like, it's real, But yeah, he's got a bunch of our stuff in his studio, and like it's good enough for him, man, and he's a hero to a lot of people. And I'm always amazed every week. And I'm not exaggerating. Every week we get a message about someone who is trying or used or is about to use or like our stuff, and we're floored. Like every week I'm like, wow, and that's cool. There's really no, I could sugarcoat it, but like, it's just cool. It's really cool to hear those messages come in.
Yeah, I keep forgetting sometimes because I'm just, I go to shows, I'm a fan, I want to watch this stuff. But a lot of the times when I'm going to shows now, my wife will sometimes, she'll have to remind me, she's like, hey, that's your strings. I'm like, oh, it is. Oh, that's crazy. It kind of escapes me because I'm just kind of lost in the moment. And she's like, that's your strings. I'm like, Oh, that's so cool. Oh, 14-year-old me would never believe this. This is awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So you touched on something, Bryce, that I wanna talk about, and I don't know how much we can get into it because it's more of an observation than anything else. But what's that about? Sorry, that's supposed to be on Do Not Disturb. Somebody broke through somehow. Sorry about that. The gear world is weird. So I've seen this happen in real time. 2 pedals, identical circuits from a certain maker. They put them out. One's cheap, well, relatively speaking, and one's slightly more expensive. And people won't even look at the cheap one. It's exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll go to the more expensive one. That same pickup maker I was referring to earlier, Ken, he talked about how he tried to price things lower and nobody would buy them. So he bumped them up to a more quote unquote normal price. And then all of a sudden people were interested. Why do we do that as guitarists and musicians? What's up with that?
So I know why I do it. So when I first got into recording, I felt like I was being greatly deceived by pro audio gear manufacturers. That's how I felt. Whether or not that's true, that's how I felt. And here's why. I couldn't afford a lot. I didn't know that this $399 tube preamp by Behringer or whatever brand, I didn't know that that was like kind of cheaper, right? Low budget. To me, $399 was a lot of money or whatever it was back then.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's marketing like vintage, warm, beautiful, sexy, greatest tone in the world tube preamp. And I buy it and I plug it in and I'm like, you screwed me. This doesn't sound like what I'm hearing on the radio, right?
Right.
So, and I had that experience with a lot of interfaces too. Like preamps on interfaces in the early 2000s were really quite poor. They've gotten better. Still not as good as like a boutique transformer in and out type, in my opinion. But back then they were really bad, right? So I'd buy a $500 interface and go, man, oof, this is not sounding great. And then I'd go to a $1,000 interface thinking I'm graduating, I'm going to the big boys, and still didn't sound very good. So I think we've all had those experiences, whether it's in pro audio or guitar or whatever, where something is being sold to us that it is, okay, hey, we know as the manufacturer, they're pitching it this way. Hey, we know this is cheap, but we did it. This is legit. This is the right circuit. And it's just like this XYZ vintage thing that you've all wanted to own and love. And we brought it to market cheaper. And then you buy it and it's not at all. You've been deceived. You feel cheated. So I think that's one of the big things Warm Audio was up against when we started was, yeah, I get that you're saying you made an 1176 compressor for the studio, but there's no way it's anywhere near as good as the $2,000-$3,000 version. It's just impossible. It's got to be garbage. It's got to be a gimmick. There's no way. Mm-hmm. And then we post circuit pictures on our website and people look inside and they're like, okay, it's fully discrete. It's transistor. It doesn't have any ICs in the signal path. It's got Cinemag input and output transformers made in California. It started to get people in 2012 to go, maybe this is possible. And it was funny because I would get approached at trade shows by other gear manufacturers that go, how are you doing this? This just seems impossible. And I'd say, well, it's not that complicated. We're buying the boutique components that are important to the signal path. We're sending those overseas. We're manufacturing overseas. We're getting the high volume manufacturing discounts that you get from doing that. And we're giving you the best of both worlds, right? The high volume manufacturing with all the good parts that we source here in the US or whatever country. And it started to resonate. So it's kind of funny. I was at trade shows teaching other manufacturers how to compete with me. I'm like, this is how you do it, right?
Right.
And they'd just be like, well, this doesn't compute. It's impossible. I've been doing this for 30 years, and that's just not how it's done. Well, that's how I'm doing it. You're welcome to do it too. But if you're just going to say it can't be done, then good luck selling your overpriced products that are really, frankly, the same thing as what we're selling. And so, but yeah, to get back to your original question, I think we oftentimes think we're getting more when we spend more, partially just because we've been disappointed. I think a lot of us have been disappointed when we bought the thing that was cheaper, that we thought, oh, this is going to get me there, and it let us down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's some of it too is definitely like, I mean, in the pedal world specifically, I mean, people have done a really good job of documenting pedal history since the 70s, right? Like, boutique boom in the 90s and 2000s and all, like, so I feel like the psychology of buying pedals is interesting and not too dissimilar from some part of guitars, right? Like, I always had a saying. I used to work at a Daddy's Junkie Music, which was then a Guitar Center and is now gone across from Berkeley in Boston at Berkeley College of Music.
I've heard a lot about that place. I've never been there.
It's sadly gone. Yeah. It's practice rooms now. But anyway, so when we used to say all the time that like people would come in and they'd go and they'd play like a Gibson Les Paul and they would play it and they couldn't afford it, right? They couldn't afford the thing. And they would try an Epiphone and eventually they'd buy the Epiphone, but they would sell it, right? And it's like, if you want the Gibson, save and buy the Gibson, right? Like, because I don't think the Epiphone's going to make you happy. And that's not a knock on Epiphone. It's not a high five for Gibson. Sometimes you have this thought in your head of like, I got to have this thing, right? And whether it's Gibson, Neve, Analog Man, right? Like, Thorpe, pick your high-end products, right? People feel like they have to have that. And I'm not here to tell you not to buy that product. I think there are customers who will keep circling through things until they get the thing they want, whether used or new, right? If available. And then there are people who are just trying to solve a sound problem, right? And they're like, they want to get a sound. And I think one of the reasons I work at Warm Audio and why I'm happy here and why I use our stuff is because I don't run into too many people that actually try our stuff, plug it in, use it in the context that they think they need it, and then don't get something out of it, right? They're not like, oh yeah, that's what I was going for, And I've been that person before. I have some stuff that I was like, man, I got to get the thing. But when I'm trying to solve a sound problem, I'm trying to do it like, I just want to get the thing, right? I want to make the sound I'm trying to make. I'm not knocking people out there that are saving for Gibsons or custom shop Fenders or anything. I'm happy that you're doing it, but it is part of it. I think it's part of the equation.
You bring up a really good point though, Des, that sometimes there's something in our heads that just if we know we're getting the best thing, okay, so let's say it's an Epiphone or it's the real Gibson Les Paul, even if the real Gibson Les Paul performs about the same, or let's say it's identical, you're just going to be happier because you know you've arrived. You have the thing that you've told yourself you can't get better than for that type of guitar. And there is, I think, a lot of that psyche too. So some of it is, right, when you buy the cheaper thing, it's not actually built correctly and it doesn't perform as well and you're disappointed. And so you buy the more expensive thing. Sometimes you buy the more expensive thing, and if you put all your emotions away and you look at it, you go, this really isn't much better, right? and it's hard to do that with our emotions. But I don't know. And so when you buy the real thing, I mean, we see that all the time too, where people will buy our product nervous, like, okay, this famous person used it and that guy told me it's good and I've seen it here and I've heard it before and I know it's good, but I'm nervous because if I buy it and it just doesn't sound good, I'm going to be mad and I knew I should have bought the high-end thing. So we sometimes have people, I mean, it's not that common, but sometimes somebody will buy our product and like here, actually, I don't know if I can hold it up in the camera here. Let me see if I can get it to show. Okay, so here's one of our Neve style preamps. Okay, so these white switches, they're soldered behind, back in here to a PCB, and they're not always perfectly straight, as you can kind of see in the camera, right?
Yeah.
And so we had a guy buy one of these once, and he was like, "I knew it, I gave you guys a shot, but I knew it. These white switches aren't perfectly straight." And then I had an actual like name brand high-end Neve product here and sent him a picture. I'm like, these are more crooked, dude, like in the high-end one. Yeah. But like in his head, he was like, I know I'm going to be disappointed. I love the price, but something's got to be wrong. And so we actually find that our products, it's funny, I feel like are more scrutinized than the high-end stuff. Because you buy the $2,000 Gibson Les Paul, you're like, okay, I got the best of the best. You're not staring at it looking for imperfection. Maybe you are, I don't know. But like a lot of people are just like, I've arrived, I have it. When you buy the cheaper thing, you're more critical of it. You look for the problems, because you think there has to be something that's not right.
Almost like you're justifying, even though you didn't buy it, you're justifying the price of the more expensive one in a way.
Yeah.
You're like, I mean, I know people on both sides. I definitely know people who microscope every guitar they get. And sometimes I'm like, it's from Amazon. It's going to have some problems,
Right.
you
Yeah,
know,
exactly.
like it's what it is, man.
Yeah.
But yeah, there is something, we all have this with various things, I think, because I talked about this quite a bit on the podcast, but I talked about it recently. My first electric guitar was actually a Gibson Les Paul, which is insane.
Nice.
But it was one of the faded ones from the early 2000s. It was, one of their affordable models. But the fact that when I got it for graduation, and I'm like, whoa, I got an electric guitar, and I was pretty sure I was getting an electric guitar, but I was like, oh yeah, I could get this Epiphone or this Schecter import line, or like that. Any of those will be cool. And they pull out this Les Paul shaped case. I'm like, oh, what's it? What have we here? And open it up, and I'm just like, my eyes just go Gibson. I'm like, oh, what? It's just a different name on the head. I know it's more than that, but it's just, in that moment, the only difference to me, I hadn't played it yet, was the name on the headstock, and my heart rate went through the roof. And I don't think I've been that excited since maybe when I got married and when my kids were born. That's probably the only two moments,
Yeah. Well, that's another thing too, is like, and I think the one thing I would say to anybody listening to this and maybe kind of wondering, I've witnessed that kind of psychological battle about what you want versus what you get, what you can have, however you want to put it. It doesn't go away when you move up, right? Because I have seen people who can swing vintage guitars, right? Go into places like Carter Vintage in Nashville, right? And get their hands on it, and then, play a custom shop, which, listen, a $12,000 custom shop guitar is no joke. You know what I mean? But a vintage is, mortgage payment in part of the country, right? So it's, what's crazy about that to me too, is that like, if you look at what a lot of like custom shops do to replicate some of the old stuff, and I feel this way about Warm, some of those guitars are better than the vintage ones. Like they're set up. They're actually like, they're ready to go. There are some vintage guitars that don't play well, and they need a lot of help, or you either need to take it away from vintage, right? You need to do some things to it that are going to make it not full vintage, reduce the value, or you keep it vintage and it plays like a dud, And we have had people grab stuff like, I'm looking at my rack at the same time, but like I've heard this about our 2A. I've heard this about our 67, where it's like, yeah, I've had one of these, or I've had access, but it was broken and it wasn't fixed right. And like, it's kind of a dud in the studio. And I got my hands on yours, and I was like, oh, this is a usable 2A, right? Like I can actually use this the way I expected to. And we have a lot of people that use our products that way too. Like, not just bedroom producers, but people who are, kind of putting the vintage stuff away, to say, hey, I'm glad I have it. It's great. But for a lot of reasons, it's not performing the way that I want it to. And I don't have $3,000 to get a $12,000 product fixed. You know what I mean? So they end up with racks of Warm gear because it performs, so.
Yeah, one thing too to think about too, when you buy the high end thing, you think, okay, it's just going to be more reliable, be less susceptible to problems too, because you're like, okay, if I spent all this money. So when we built our recording studio here, we bought lots of products that Warm Audio doesn't make, right? We had to buy monitor controllers and speakers and patch bays and all kinds of stuff. And I wish I could tell you, I mean, it was all high end, like expensive name brand stuff. I wish I could tell you all of it arrived perfect, but we had lots of stuff break, and it was like expensive. And like, I'm like, man, the amount of money you spent on this, let's say one of our sets of speakers, and have 2 tweeters be bad out of the box, right?
Wow.
It's kind of interesting. And it wasn't just that; it was several pieces of rack gear. We had things fail. And I'm not, trying to, imply that stuff's going to fail, but it's just, that's another thing. I think when people buy the high end and something goes wrong, they make this assumption that, oh man, I must be like the one guy ever to have a problem, like, cause it's high end and they never have problems. And it's like, they have some guy doing a 10,000 point inspection on every, it's like, no, some of these companies are, even though their stuff's high end, it's still ran by, like a family, smaller type organization. And they miss things sometimes, right? They'll make it right. And that's what's important. So
yeah,
anyway.
totally. Yeah, totally. I mean, I think back to when you consider about like products working or not working, this is the kind of thing that, again, it happens across all budgets. It happens across pro, guitar, drums. I've seen people who have drum shells cracked, showing up like humidity and stuff with acoustic guitar. That's actually a really great example. If you've ever purchased a hand-built, like a luthier-built acoustic guitar, that's not the same product as buying a Taylor, Martin, or Gibson. Those thicknesses and the finishes are designed to endure more, right? To endure a tour, to endure going inside and out of a room. You can spend 30 grand on an acoustic guitar that can't leave a treated room, or else it will crack, So it's like understanding what you built, like assuming vintage means reliable is very dangerous. And like we run into that sometimes with R&D. Like if we're going in and trying to, faithfully recreate something, how do you even know what's the right sounding one? You know what I mean? Like say you get 3 microphones or 3 compressors or 3 pedals, they can sound different. They can all sound different. They often do. They sound different more often than they sound the same, which puts the builder in this place of what is the right sound, right? Like what are we going for? And in the pedal world, you can say whatever you want about certain manufacturers and, innovation in terms of, box design or what they name the pedal or, maybe a quirk or an EQ or something that they add to it. But it's 2024, guys. Like the topologies are out there, right? There's not a ton of hyper innovative, wow, I invented a circuit that no one's ever used before. You're basing off something, right? You have some loose basis, especially in dirt, right? Like there's something going on there. So, who knows, right? Like they may have had access to a certain type of overdrive when they were designing their own that had a specific voicing very different from ones like it. So that may be why, a certain pedal was born. It could have, tube screamer topology and it could have come out in 2017 or something like that, but maybe their TS-808 sounded different than the other ones. So who knows?
Well, and then there's just the difference that things like layout make that the general consumer doesn't really understand, because you look at the schematic and you're like, well, it's this. But sometimes the way you lay out the board will have a dramatic impact on the performance of that circuit. And like a lot of people get confused about like the Timmy. People look at a Timmy and be like, oh, well, look at the schematic. It's a tube screamer. But nobody who plays a Timmy is going to tell you that it sounds like a tube screamer, because it doesn't, like at all. Yeah. They're both overdrives, so there's some overlap there, but they react way differently. Like they're not the same. And like I mentioned Wampler a couple of times because I get a lot of my circuit knowledge from him, and he's like, yeah, people don't get it, man. They're like, it's a tube screamer. Everything's a tube screamer. Clones are tube screamers, and so are compressors. Everything's a tube screamer. Blah. Yeah. But it's the topologies are out there, but it's what you do with them that changes it at the end of the day.
Well, in the examples you just used, I mean, if you change the mids, you change the sound, right? Like if the mid focus is different on one pedal versus another, how can you say it sounds the same, right? Like, and like, how do you call a pedal transparent or not transparent, right? Like compare taking something like a Centavo and using it as a boost or an overdrive on a channel versus taking a clone channel amp like a Boogie Lone Star and switching between the clone channels and setting everything at noon. What's more different? 9 times out of 10, the pedal is going to make the amp sound different than switching channels on a cloned amp, right? So how transparent is that pedal really?
Hello there. I'd like to introduce you to your new best friend, the Chase Bliss Audio Lossy. Lossy is a collaboration between Chase Bliss and Goodhertz. And it's meant to give you some control over those weird digital artifacts that come with very compressed audio. You're hearing it right now. All the changes that are taking place are strictly coming from my playing dynamics. I'm just interacting with the pedal and letting it do its thing. In some true stereo goodness. If you'd like some more details about Lossy, I'd invite you to head over to chaseblintsaudio.com. I think you're gonna like what you find.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. We're driven by the search for better, But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/MBO. Terms and conditions apply.
This episode is brought to you by AWS. Amazon Q Business is the new generative AI assistant from AWS. Many tasks can make business slow, like wading through mud. Help! Luckily, there's a faster, easier, less messy choice. Amazon Q can securely understand your business data to help you streamline tasks, like summarizing quarterly results or doing complex analyses in no time. Q got this. Learn what Amazon Q Business can do for you at aws.com/learn more.
You know,
I don't believe it. I don't believe in transparent overdrives. I don't think they exist. I think that's a made up thing.
Yeah, actually, that term, it cracks me up. I was actually thinking that as he was talking, like transparent overdrive. It's like, are you listening to yourself? Like what you're saying? Like you can't be transparent and be distorting at the same time, or overdrive.
Full disclosure, I'm admitting something on your podcast, and I Bryce, I swear we're not going to get in trouble for this. We use the phrase transparent on our Centavo webpage because we have to, because that's how people look for it. Like, I think that the pedal, when I turn it on, nothing happens? Of course not. I hear stuff, I hear changes, but I have to write that as a marketer, or else you won't find the pedal. So like the information has run away from us. And that is one thing that's funny at Warm. Like when we do like a faithful recreation, is like, we talk all the time about like, man, I don't want to say this because it's not true. Like, we've used the product, we're in R&D, like it doesn't do that thing. And it's like, yeah, but millions is probably giving Pro Audio a lot of credit, but like hundreds of thousands of people, or in the super nerdy, tens of thousands of people know it by its sound profile that is out there. So we, if any other marketers out there in Pro Audio guitar are probably feeling a little pain here, because it's like, we have to write this stuff or else you won't find it when you're looking for it.
Oh, so, yeah.
That's my admission of guilt.
Exactly.
That's my admission of guilt.
I know exactly what you're talking about, and I've had to do the same thing before. Even in describing some of our strings, I'm like, if I describe it that way, what it's actually doing, people won't understand it. So I have to use different language so that people understand it. You sometimes we have to dig ourselves out of our own hole that we're in, because we've gone so far down the rabbit hole. Right. It's just ridiculous. And so we have to pull back a little bit and go like, but what are people looking for? What are people who aren't as deep into this as we are going to be asking for, or searching for, or, talking to their buddy at the guitar store about?
Yep.
That's where half the stuff gets sold, is by talking to your guy at the guitar store. And if you don't have the same language, it's not going to be a good experience for anybody.
Right.
So,
I think we use this term a lot. We say open yet creamy and warm top end. Well, open would mean that it's probably transparent and clear. And then we're like, oh, but by the way, it's also creamy and warm at the same time. It's basically everything you could ever want. And I guess that is probably what everybody's searching for, right? They're searching for enough clarity and enough openness that it sounds clear, and you can whatever they're playing, instrument or audio, is not muddy. But they also like a little bit of dirt and a little bit of warmth in there. So I don't know. You're not necessarily lying to say it's open and creamy and warm, but they also all are kind of contradicting each other, those words.
Right. Oh, yeah. Well, that's the weird thing is like, so I'll use our mics for an example. Our 44 and our 8000 do not sound the same, but you can't say that the 44 is dark or muddy, because then people will go, oh, it'll sound, that's the problem. Dark isn't a scary word, but then people read dark and think muddy. And it's like, no, it's not muddy. It just doesn't have this bright top end that an 8000 does. Like they're from different eras, dude. Like they're different. Of course they sound different. Mariah Carey, Frank Sinatra, right? Like they wouldn't want to sound the same and don't sound the same on their recordings. But there are like these words that will lead people. There's marketing words that will lead people to believe something that is not true. So you have to like play this funny game of like guiding people to, not lying, to be really clear, never lying, but like, hey, I think I know what you're going for if you're looking for a mic like this, and here are the good words we'll use to guide you there, right?
Right.
And I imagine you run into it with strings too, because it's like, again, as a guitar player, I know that I think about things like action, right, and feel, life, like timbre, tone, all those things come into play. And it's like, you know, people want things, they want differentiation. That's what we're really talking about now, right? Is differentiation, right? Like, why is one set of strings different from another? Why is one mic different from the other? One OD from the other? We want differentiation, but we don't want to have a limited product, right? Like, I want it to be different, but I don't want to lose things. And I think the reality is, you either got to have a few sets of strings, a few overdrives, a few amps, whatever, or you end up with products that have scope creep that are insane, and you have 5-channel amplifiers and 85, voice. Like, you end up buying modelers, right? Because it's one box that can do every single thing. Meh. Okay. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But then you get sick of it because it doesn't do everything perfect. So then you buy other stuff anyway. You know what I mean?
It is kind of weird how a lot of people, I'm guilty of this too. Like if I looked at something like a ridiculous amp with 400 channels on it and all these EQs and knobs and switches and everything, I might go like, ugh, I don't know what to do with that. That's weird. But if I look at 5 different amps that have the equivalent number of knobs and switches between them, I can totally distinguish how to use each of those. Yeah. I don't know why our brains are wired that way, but I think a lot of people feel similarly.
Yeah, I mean,
it's weird.
You need limits. You need limitations, right? Brian Eno wrote a white paper about a console that he used in the early 2000s, a mixing console that he said had every feature you could ever want on it, every knob and whatever. And he said it was the most uncreative experience he's ever had because he needs a console that's simpler. That's like, okay, this is what that console sounds like. Cool. Now that I know that, I'm going to drive it into a little bit of distortion. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. When you have every choice at your fingertips, right? Like you're like, where do I focus?
Yeah.
I've got to read that. I'd love to read that. I'm going to look that up later. That sounds interesting.
I'm guilty of, I've owned a bunch of 3-channel amps in the past because I was like, this is the one, man. This is the one that's going to have an awesome clean, an awesome middle, and an awesome lead. And they were high-end things. And I got rid of all of them to have specialized amps over time because it was just like too much of a science project to dial in every single thing. And yeah, it just wasn't for me.
Or you found that you were just hanging out on one channel all the time?
Yeah, exactly. I have, I'm going to name drop because I think this is a great product and a great company and a great amp. I'm not knocking this product. I bought a Mark V twice. I bought this amp 2 times. I cannot love the middle channel, and I don't know why. I like the cleans. I like the Mark IV setting and the extreme setting on the third channel. Something about the middle channel that it's just like I don't like it. Tried to solve it with pedals, not for me. But I've done the 3-channel amp thing multiple times, and I've just ended up getting specialized amps because I'm like I don't want 80% of 3 channels. I want 100% of certain sounds. That's just more for me.
100%.
Yeah.
Well, guys, we are approaching the end of the main episode of the podcast, and I've got 2 classic questions that I like to wrap this show up with every single episode, every single time. Every single time I've got new people. Sometimes we skip it for repeat guests, but you guys are new. But before I do that, I like to give the guests a chance to take the floor, shout out anybody you want to shout out, plug anything you want to plug, say hi to your grandma, whatever it is, the floor is yours right now. Either one of you can go first.
Oh man,
pressure.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have anything big. This is Des. Thanks for having us for sure. I mean, this has been really fun. Love to talk about tone, and I like to talk about products and the industry and marketing. I think anybody out there who is struggling to figure out, this is my advice. I like to tell anyone, if you're struggling to figure out what piece of gear you want and you're a guitar player, just get your guitar set up and then go play it, and it'll probably make you really happy. Play the stuff you have before you go buy anything else. Unless it's warm audio, then buy warm audio. Just kidding.
Yeah, no, thanks for having us. It's been a lot of fun. I'd say any little plug I want to throw out there is technology is getting better. It used to be, it felt like in the early 2000s that if you wanted, a really good sounding amp, it had to be built the old way, right? It's got to be built exactly like they did it in 1965. And it feels like now technology is getting better. You can now have things that sound quite good that are not built the old way. And so I'd encourage, Warm Audio is mostly about building things the old way, but we are looking at new technology and just ways to say, can we make something better? Can we give you everything that you'd ever wanted in the old thing, but actually improve some things? And I'd encourage the viewers to not be scared of new technology. That's not even a plug for Warm Audio, because we're all about old technologies better. There you have it.
Cool. Well, thank you guys for your time. I really enjoyed this. I think we could probably do another one of these days, because there was some stuff I wanted to touch on that the conversation didn't go that way, so we went a different way, and maybe we'll do it again sometime if you guys are down.
Sounds good. Sounds cool. Great.
All right, classic questions. Here we go. First one: what is your favorite Boss pedal?
Oh man.
I'm going to need a second.
It's a tough one.
I'll just pick the first one that I ever bought. I think it was called Metal Zone.
Yeah. All right. Absolutely.
I just love that you just get heavy distortion really easily.
Mm-hmm. That's a great
It's got a great EQ on it too. It really does. People freak out about it because it's real easy to dial in on bad sound with that pedal. And that's what most of us do when we're starting out. But it also can do some magical things if you play with it. So yeah, I'm a Metal Zone fan. I've got two.
I didn't have a great ear when I started playing guitar, so it was kind of like I want distortion. Like I couldn't discern from like, oh, I'm doing a little bit of breakup. I'm at edge of breakup. Ooh, I'm overdrive. Like it was like I got to hear distortion. Okay, cool. This pedal does it.
Yep, totally.
That's a great answer. I think Metal Zone haters haven't spent enough time with Metal Zones because, man, I swear I'm not meaning to name drop them twice. Metal Zones are like boogie amps. You can make them sound bad, right? Like there's a lot of tonal options there, but they can sound awesome too. You just got to get used to it. So that's a really good answer. I'm going to give, this is such a lame answer. My favorite Boss pedal is a TU2 or 3 or whatever number they're on because they don't break and they always work.
That's the most popular answer.
It really is. That's funny. Well, they do. They always work. And I've bought fancy tuners that have broken on tours and in shows and like they don't break. So yeah.
That's mostly Boss across the board. You can, use them as projectile weapons if you have to, and it'll probably work for the show.
Yeah, right. Well, I'll give you a tone answer. The original old school purple delays, 3-knob delays they sound awesome. They're incredible.
Yeah. DM2s can't go wrong. And I haven't played the Wazacraft versions, but I hear they're quite nice as well.
I'm sure they're good. I've played a couple of the Wazas and they have not let me down. The Waza tuner, man, there you go.
Yeah, there you go. Mm-hmm. All right, final question. What is your favorite kind of pizza?
I have a very specific answer. You're going to have to go first, Bryce.
I'm a Supreme guy. My wife doesn't love all the veggies that comes with that, so we oftentimes do meat lovers. But I like Supreme. I like the olives and the peppers and all the extra stuff on there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you're in Austin, correct?
Austin, yeah.
Yeah. Austin's. I haven't been there yet, but I hear it's a fantastic food town. Is there any specific pizzeria that you want to plug that I have to try when I go there?
Oh man, Austin pizza's kind of interesting. It's real thin crust if you're into that. I like that one. It's kind of pathetic. We always get Domino's just because it's so close to our house.
I had Domino's for the first time in many years recently, the thin crust, because I was playing Dungeons and Dragons and they would deliver. So we got the thin crust, and you know what? It's satisfied. It hit the spot.
It's a lot better than it used to be.
It is. Yeah, definitely.
So,
Des, I'm ready for your specific answer, being from where you're from.
Yeah. So, people from Western New York. I feel like I'm starting a fairy tale. A long time ago, in a land far away. No, people from Western New York get serious about their pizza because we have a very different style. It is in the state of New York, but it's very Sicilian style pizza. Now, my favorite pizza in the world is a cup and char, burnt pepperoni and cheese pizza. And in Rochester, my favorite place to get it is a place called Guida's in Irondequoit. And then if you're in Buffalo, Bocce Club Pizza makes the best. And the beautiful thing about Western New York is anywhere west of Syracuse, if you order wings at the pizza place, the Buffalo wings will be incredibly good. So cup and char pepperoni, tons of cheese, and Buffalo wings extra crispy.
Okay. And I have a bonus question for you, Des,
Uh-oh.
just because this is something that's been brought to my attention over the years. Where's your go-to spot for a garbage plate?
Oh, yes. I'm so glad you asked this question. So, no.
I knew you would
Yeah,
be.
no, only, that's not even a Buffalo thing. That's a Rochester thing.
It is a Rochester
So the
thing,
best
yes.
place to get one currently is Park Ave Hots, right in the city. They were originally in Irondequoit in my hometown, next to the House of Guitars, one of the greatest music stores in the world. Now a bank, sadly. Yeah, I know. But Park Ave Hots, they have all the fixings, and they sell the important app called Pizza Lugs, where you get like pepperoni and cheese and a fried egg roll, and you dip it in marinara sauce. Yes, people from Rochester will literally eat Pizza Lugs and a garbage plate in the same sitting. It's the best after the bar food you could possibly get. But yeah, that would be my favorite. Park Ave Hots, Empire Hots if you're on the east side.
Okay, beautiful.
Yep.
Well, guys, thank you so much for taking the time. We're going to slide over to Patreon and see what kind of shenanigans we can get into over there, if that works for you.
Sounds
Awesome.
good.
All right, cool. All right, everybody, for Des and Bryce, this is Blake, and as always, folks, good luck and good tones. All right, folks, there you have it. There's another episode in the can. If you want to hear us get into aliens, oh yeah, we get into aliens, you can go over to Patreon, where for just $5 a month, you can get access to the extra special bonus feed, the extra special bonus episodes that nobody else gets to hear, and you can get those beamed directly to whatever podcast player you're using every single week through Patreon. And if you can't do that right now, I totally understand, but if you would consider sharing this show with somebody you think might enjoy it, perhaps somebody who wants to start their own sort of gear business journey, or anybody else you might think that would get something out of this story, I would appreciate you sharing this with them. That is huge for me. It is the number one way people find this show, and I appreciate everyone who has done that. Thank you so much. Please continue to do so. Please stay safe through the holidays. Please be cool to each other. And please, 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 please keep on making music. Do that for me. All right. Later, folks. One last thing before we totally sign off here. I just want to remind you that if you do any shopping at Stringjoy, that's Stringjoy guitar strings made in Nashville, that will help me out as well. As I've said for years, I'm heavily involved in that company, and I really do think they're making the best products on the market. So if you would like to try custom strings, go to tonemob.com/stringjoy and check them out today. I seriously love what the team down there is doing. I help them out with all kinds of things, and by you supporting them, you are also supporting me as well. And hey, you need some strings, so why not get some custom strings just for your guitar and playing style? Again, the link for that is tonemob.com/stringjoy, and that will take you right to their website, and you can do all your shopping through there, and that will help everyone involved out. So thank you very much. Talk to you next time. We are brought to you by the wonderful folks at Gun Street Wiring Shop. Yes, Gun Street Wiring Shop. I've talked about them before. I used to say based out of Bend, Oregon, but guess what? Sean moved to my neck of the woods. Sean's in Portland. Sean is awesome and has helped me with a bunch of stuff lately. And if you have wiring needs for your guitar, he can help you too. If you want to get weird with it, he can get weird. If you just need to spruce things up a little bit, there's your guy. He takes all the guesswork out of doing your guitar wiring, and he makes it simple, and his customer service is top-notch, and I can't say enough good things about Gun Street as a company. I really respect Sean and what he's all about, and the product is top-notch. I've got 3 different guitars that now have Gun Street harnesses in them, and I could not be happier. So go to gunstreetwiringshop.com and check them out.
What's up, everybody? I am Finn McKenty, host of the Punk Rock NBA podcast, part of the Sound Talent Media podcast network. My podcast is all about doing what you love for a living, and every week I sit down and talk to people who have done exactly that. For example, musicians like Tommy from Between the Buried and Me, Matt from Periphery, Lil Lotus and Shinigami, among many others, photographers, artists, designers, YouTubers like Glenn Fricker and Sarah Dici, and I unpack exactly how they got to where they are today with the goal of helping you do the same. So if that sounds cool, you can listen and subscribe at soundtalentmedia.com, and I'll see you there.
This is the story of Whitney Houston.
This is the story of Kurt Cobain.
Of George Michael, of Otis Redding, of Amy Winehouse, of Michael Hutchence, Bob Marley. This is the story of Prince.
It's a new podcast series
about how they died, why they died, and why we're still talking about them so long after.
It's like nothing you've ever heard before.
It's storytelling.
But it's more than that, because rock stars,
they tell us how we feel. They change our mood.
They change the clothes we wear, the people we hang out with,
the way we remember things.
It's them who give us those ludicrous moments, the ones where you're
jumping around, singing your heart out, feeling understood.
And it's those moments we'll help you remember, the ones you're thinking about right now.
That feeling.
That feeling.
It's coming soon from Crowd Network.
Just search for Death of a Rock Star on your podcast app.
And subscribe now.